Professor Federico Donelli. Welcome to Nuzuri Kahawa Report. We are extremely lucky to have you. And please just introduce yourself and let us know who you are and what do you teach, where you're from, and everything else we need to know about you.
Hey, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure. I'm current assistant professor of international relations at University of Trieste in Italy, and I'm working on politics and security of Sub-Saharan Africa and Middle East, and specifically, my focus area is the Red Sea, wider region. I call it wider region because I consider both shores of the Red Sea, not only the African side or the Middle Eastern side, but I consider as a single core region. And yeah, that's all, I think.
Okay. And you published a book called Turkey in Africa, Turkey's Strategic Involvement in Sub-Saharan Africa. Can you please tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, that was the result of my postdoc research. It is a book published by Bloomsbury in 2021. It's talking about the foreign policy of Turkey and specifically the strategic engagement of Turkey with Sub-Saharan Africa. When we are talking about Turkey and Africa, we have to consider one key aspect. For many years, I would say even for centuries, Turkey and the former Ottoman Empire established good relation with North African states or North African regions, and not with Sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a kind of discovery for Turkey when they decided to open towards Sub-Saharan African states. So it was something almost completely new. And the book is talking about the last 20 years of engagement, the factors behind the engagement or the opening, some of the key assets of Turkey's strategy, some of the instruments, so the actors, and of course has been published in 2021, and so the things even are changed, still changing. So there are some development during the last 3-4 years, and so yeah, I'm happy, of course, to talk about the book and talking about even the recent development.
Yeah. In one of your, you highlight Turkey's Africa opening policy in 2005. That marked a turning point. But what extent do you see the Ottoman era ties shaping Ankara's modern engagement in Africa? Is this a historical narrative influential in policy decision, or is it more, I guess, a rhetorical tool for legitimacy? And I was wondering
Uh,
if you could, sorry, Professor, go
no,
ahead.
no, please go ahead. No, please, Daniel, go ahead.
And I was
Complete
wondering
it.
if you could explain to the audience what is Turkey's Africa opening policy, and how pivotal was it in Turkey's foreign policy regarding strategic realignment, but also global positioning, diplomacy, security cooperation, and Ankara soft power.
Okay, well, I'll start to the last part of your question to try to present a general overview of the engagement of Turkey in Africa. As you said, 2005 is the turning point, because Turkey launched this opening towards Sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, this call open to Africa, but we are talking about Sub-Saharan African states. 2005 is not the right year of the turning point. The right year is 1998. 1998, before AKP, before Erdogan ruling party. At that time, we've got a different government. The foreign minister was Ismail Cem. Ismail Cem was in some way forced to open different direction of the foreign policy. Why it was in some way forced? Because at that time, if you remember or if you know, the Turkey was in the middle of the European Union membership process. So in this long path for the accession to European Union, but at that time received a sort of or we can say it arrived in a stuck moment, because 1998 was the Helsinki meeting, and at Helsinki European countries and European Union decided to stop the path of Turkey. So many policymakers, including Ismail Cem, realized how hard would it be to access to European Union. So they decided to starting to change the foreign policy, no more in one single direction, so Western oriented, toward a multi-direction. So they decided to open new way toward different regions. At that time, Turkey was engaged, of course, toward European countries, United States, and in some way with Central African states. Because with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Turkey established a relationship with the former Soviet republics with the link of language and ethnicity. So Turkish republics, Kazakhstan, all the Central Asian states. So Africa, from the point of view of Ismail Cem, could be one of these roads, one of these new roads of foreign policy. The problem of Ismail Cem and his government, I mean the government where he was foreign minister, was that at that time Turkey was in the middle of financial crisis and political instability. So even though he drawn a plan, an Africa action plan, he was not able to implement that plan because there were no resources, there was not the right condition, political condition to implement that plan. What happened in 2005? We've got completely different condition. Turkey apply and receive help from the International Monetary Fund. Turkey's government at that time, led by the AKP, so the Erdogan party's ruling party, got the majority in the parliament. So it was really stable political government. So they were able to implement and, of course, to change in some way, to modify in some way, the same plan prepared by Ismail Cem. So this was the beginning. And the factors behind this beginning, this new way toward sub-Saharan Africa, were both domestic factors and external or international factors. And if you want, we can even stress on both categories. To answer to the point of the Ottoman legacy, honestly speaking, I consider the way in which Turkey is using the Ottoman legacy more as something related to rhetoric and narrative, to legitimize, in some cases, the engagement. This happened not only toward Africa, this happened, for example, in the Balkans. In the Balkans, of course, there's a long history. There's some affinities in terms of cultural and collective memories affinities. There's some still example of the Ottoman past in terms of architecture, for example, in the food, many things. This is harder for Africa, especially for sub-Saharan Africa. But there's still many signs, evidences of the Ottoman past, like mosque, for example. So in some way, they try to exploit even towards sub-Saharan Africa the card of the Ottoman legacy, especially in the way in which they, we can say that in the storytelling. They are presenting themselves as different actors, different in comparison with the European powers, the former colonial powers, different actors in comparison with China, different actors in comparison with the United States, and plus, they are linked together the experience of the Ottoman Empire with the experience of the African people and African communities. So in many cases, they presenting themselves, the Turkish history, and we can say the Ottoman history, as subject to the same imperialism that occur to African people. So it's like to put the two things, the two historical lines at the same level. Okay, European powers in the long 19th century wanted to colonize the Ottoman Empire as they wanted to colonize, and they did, the African continent. So yeah, it's interesting how Turkey declining the Ottoman legacy in different regions in different manners. In Africa, they are doing in this way.
That's very interesting. Uh, so, in terms of expanding to the economic and trade expansion, I think it was a very fascinating puzzle of your book. Um, and I came to this analysis. So, unlike China's large-scale infrastructure investment, or you can call it Western conditional aid, or string-attached aid, Turkey has presented itself as an alternative economic partner. So, however, do you think Turkey's business-friendly model is sustainable in the long run, given its own economic challenges and the volatility of African markets?
Well, yeah, you're right. Turkey is trying to present itself again as different things, as an alternative and different things. I would say also as the third way between the Western one and the Chinese one. As you said, there's no conditionalities in the aid and investment. So Turkey doesn't care about democratization, about human rights, about institution. They are from some point of view, they are transactional. They are just thinking about pragmatic sense. At the same time, they are less vertical than China. When China gets concession for project or establish an agreement to build something, the famous example are infrastructure projects. They are building and they sign an agreement with the government of an African country, and say, okay, right, do you need an hospital? Do you need an airport? We will build you an airport, an hospital, but you give me back something. And usually this something is natural resources. Turkey's interest too to natural resources, but they are behave in a different manner. Do you need an hospital? Okay, we take our engineers, we take our, we can say, companies to build the hospital, but also we give some work to the local people. So when they are doing these things, they also people. There's a kind of exchange in know-how, in expertise. Okay, so in some way they are more inclusive than the Chinese. Usually in the contract, in the agreement, you've got a percentage. For example, 50% of the manpower are locals, and maybe in reality are not 50%, but they always got some. And this is the first thing important of the Turkish approach. The second things related to this way of know-how, exchange, training is related to the scholarship programs. So what Turkey has done is also to establish scholarship programs to take the best students of African high school to study in Turkey, to doing university in Turkey. At the end of this period, and they cover everything, they cover tuition fee, they cover everything. They live in Turkey, they learn Turkish, and so after, when they graduated, they can choose. They can choose to stay in Turkey, for example. They can choose to, okay, I've got a master, so I can apply for a job around the world. Okay. In that case, they have to give back part, not the total amount, but part of the scholarship. Not immediately, but in the course of many years, for example. But if they decided to move back to their own home country, they don't have to give back anything. What does it mean? This doesn't mean that a graduate student from Turkish university that, for example, is moving back to, I don't know, Ethiopia or Somalia. Of course, Somalia is a particular case. Anyway, Ethiopia most probably will be able to get a good position within a company, get a good position, for example, within institution or administrative apparatus, or even in politics. So they establish a link, a direct link, not today, or not only for today, but for the next decade. This is why I believe that this approach could even overcome some financial crisis, for example. Turkey doesn't have the resources of the Gulf states, for example. They know that. They cannot put a lot of money as the Gulf states are doing. So they have to find a different way. Their different way is to establish the link, people-to-people link in multiple sectors, from the political sector to the economic and business sector. And of course, when you've got some student graduated in Turkey, for example, an engineer, and you have to establish or to build an infrastructure project in Ethiopia, you can call him or her and say, great, he or she speaks Turkish, he received a graduation, a bachelor or master in Turkey, he or she established its own company in Ethiopia that can work with Turkish company. And if she or he need anything, it will look to Turkey. So this is the long approach.
Okay, so Ankara is playing a very a geopolitical game for the future, meaning winning the hearts and minds of the population.
I think
So
so.
do you think
And no, yes,
so?
please.
Is it a state-led initiative, or is it a private sector-driven investment, or is it a collaboration of both?
Officially, it's a state initiative, but during the more than 20 years of power of AKP, and especially of Erdogan as a prime minister and then as a president, we've got strong connection between politics and some sector, economic sector. So it's definitely a state initiative supported by economic sector. In terms of economic sectors, even here we've got some change, because at the beginning were mainly manufacturers companies, then construction companies, and now are mainly energy companies, and of course defense and security companies.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, out of curiosity, I'm very familiar with the military and security cooperation between Turkey and Somalia. In fact, Turkey's only foreign base outside, in Africa, it's actually in Somalia. So, talking about military and security partnerships, so Turkey's military presence in Africa, particularly in Somalia, signals a broader strategic ambition. That is very subjective opinion. But do you see this part of a long-term power projection strategy, similar to the Gulf states, or is it more transactional, aimed at securing economic and diplomatic leverages in key regions like the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea or the Sahel?
I think that at the beginning it was a mix between opportunity and necessity. Opportunity because when Turkey in 2011 established a link with Somalia, it was a time where almost international community didn't care about Somalia. It was, it was like a failure, a failure of international community from multiple perspective, from state building perspective, from security perspective, from humanitarian perspective. Turkey saw the opportunity to do something, of course, even something good in terms of humanitarian terms, but at the same time to play its game without competitor at all in Somalia. So in that sense, it was an opportunity. Of course, if you want to get engaged in the state building of Somalia, you have to also take care about the security sector. So the military facility in Mogadishu was a necessity in that terms to train some groups of the Somali National Army, of course. But was also a necessity because when Turkey decided to open that military facility was, we can say, 2016, and it was in the middle of regional crisis. Regional crisis, I mean, especially between Middle Eastern actors. At that time was the long wave of the so-called Arab Spring. There were change in many different countries like Libya, say Egypt, Syria was in the middle of civil war, and so on. At that time, there were two main competitor blocs. On one end, we had UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Bahrain. On the other end, we had Qatar and Turkey. So, if you remember, we were at the eve of the break within JCC when the UAE and Saudi Arabia decide to promote a blockade of Qatar.
Yes.
And the other military base, Turkish military base, of course, there are even some outspot in the Iraqi Kurdistan, but the real military base is in Qatar and Mogadishu, the two military bases abroad. At that time, there were really the perception, even among Turkish policymakers, that a potential intervention of Saudi Arabia and UAE against Qatar was a possibility. This is why they decided to increase the presence in Qatar. At the same time, in this logic, they decided to establish a military presence in Somalia. In some way, was to play a role in what was going on in Yemen and to control also the, we can say, the sea line communication on the Gulf of Aden. So it was a mix, opportunity and necessity. Of course, the landscape, the regional landscape changed radically. We've got since 2020 a general normalization of relationship among different Middle Eastern states. So Turkey normalized with Saudi, normalized with Egypt, normalized with UAE. And nowadays, we've got different alignment, completely different alignment. If you ask me, the main problems is between UAE and Saudi Arabia. And Turkey is trying to balancing in some way between these two countries. So today, that military base has another relevance in terms of, as you have said, a geostrategic projection for the next decade in two ways. On one way, on the regional dynamics, I mean on the Horn of African dynamics, and in the other way, and that is what I think is really important to stress, in terms of Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific arena is the core of geopolitics of the next decade. It will be with the, of course, Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean. So this wider arena. And for Turkey, as for some European state, as for other players, if you've got a position on the Eastern African shore, you've got also in sort of position in the wider Indo-Pacific. You can play that game. Otherwise, you cannot. So I think that the reason nowadays are two and are related with these two things.
Interesting. I guess, in your opinion, how do African nations perceive Turkey's military involvement compared to traditional security actors like the United States, French, and Russia?
Well, of course, they know that what Turkey can offer is not what the United States can do.
Yes.
They know that. At the same time, they recognize that the global dynamics are changing. We know even before the election of the President Trump election, of course, this first month of new administration changed even more dynamics, but the transformation began 8, 10 years ago. And African states realized that change. African states realized that there's a sort of challenge by this transformation, of course, because nobody's know how to navigate in this new international system. But at the same time, the new international system offers many opportunities. One of these opportunities is to diversify the partnership from multiple perspectives, from economic, political, and even security perspective. So many states, many African states that have to address many security challenge from, we can say, internal army groups, from terrorism, from criminal organization. They found an alternative to traditional partners in Turkey. Why in Turkey? Because Turkey, especially during the last, we can say, 5 years, so I think it was really important how Turkey show off the efficiency of its defense sector in two conflicts. One was in Nagorno-Karabakh, and the other one was in Libya. Of course, we can say paramount of these defense sectors were the drones, the TB2 or other drones. They showed to be efficient in both conflicts. So Turkey understood that drones, and generally speaking, all the defense sector could be an asset in establish and strengthening relation with African countries. On the other hand, the African countries found an alternative to course, more expensive military hardware, like the American one, the Israeli, or even the European, and more efficient than the Chinese or the Russian one. What happened during the last 3 years, so following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is that Turkey and Turkish defense sector became even more relevant to African state, because for an African state decide to sign an agreement, a defense and security agreement, and to purchase some defense hardware from Turkey is less costly in terms of political terms than establish an agreement, the same agreement with Russia. Why? Because if you establish an agreement with Russia, choose to side with Russia. If you establish a defense and security agreement with Turkey, of course, you keep it in the Western side because Turkey is a NATO partner, a NATO member. At the same time, you do not completely break with Russia. So, deal for them. And of course, defense hardware, Turkish defense hardware are good enough. And that's why. And finally, there's another aspect that Turkey does not only provide military hardware, but even provide training in counterinsurgency, in counterterrorism. So not only sign an agreement to provide military hardware, but also to provide training.
Yeah, I concur with you, and that was self-evident also during the war between Ethiopia and the TPLF, and well, the Abiy Ahmed regime was using Turkish drones to defeat the Tigray Defense Forces, and interesting. So as we've seen, most likely Russia is going to have a naval base in Sudan, and also most likely in Libya. Do you see in the future that there's a possibility that Turkey might branch out to the west side of Africa, but also having a military base on west side of Africa, but also on North Africa? Or is it mainly concerned in the Indo-Pacific region?
No, I think that there's if you analyze the recent, again, 5 years of Turkish policy toward sub-Saharan Africa, you can see how it's shifting toward the West, especially in the Sahel. This is a consequence of the vacuum left by France, of course, but at the same time, and by the way, to answer to your question, Turkey established an agreement with Chad in order to take control of a former French military base. At the same time, established many defense agreements with Niger, with Chad, with other countries, to Nigeria, to sell drones and other military hardware. So in some way, in the Western Africa, Turkey again is providing an alternative to Russia. Definitely. Especially an alternative not only to Russia, but even to the West. And you know how strong is the feeling, anti-Western feeling, especially anti-French feelings. So this is why I believe that Turkey is definitely an asset of NATO, because it's a NATO member that can operate and behave more autonomously. And of course, this sometimes it has been a problem because Turkey is a problematic partner of the West, but at the same time is the only partner that can do something that the other can't. So I believe that in terms of counter influence of Russia, Turkey is important. Then we have to open discussion about the relationship between Turkey and Russia, because nowadays they are on multiple front, and they change their behavior. In some cases, they are more confrontational. In some other, they seems to be in cooperation style, and some other, they are really against to each other. So the real question is how this relationship will evolve in the Sudanese area, in Chad, in Libya, in Niger, in Burkina Faso. Do they find a compromise, or Turkey challenge Russia influence, really? So I think this is really one of the trends that we have to consider in the next few years in this area.
Okay. I guess going in the next segment, which is directly interlinked to security cooperation, would be soft power and cultural diplomacy. Um, as far as I know, Ankara has actively promoted cultural diplomacy through TIKA, the Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency, and I think it was the Mari Foundation as well. Um, so often leveraging Islamic solidarity, but it's not only Turkey, but also the Gulf countries do it. However, in increasingly secular and Africa is religiously diverse, how effective is this approach in forcing, I guess, a long-term influence compared to China's economic-driven engagement? I know it will work predominantly in North Africa, but how would it work in Sub-Saharan Africa?
Yeah, the things is I think that one of the programs of we really with great success was the one that I mentioned before, the Turkey Buzlare, the scholarship to students. That was really I think this is something that, for example, European states should copy, because it established long-term relationship. It established an opportunity not only at the state level, of course, at the government level, but at the people to people, the personal relationship among students and future, we can say, even the ruling class. So this is really important. This is linked to another programs that Turkey launched since the beginning, so since even before 2005, that was the educational sector. The idea to spread around the continent, spread around many African states, the Turkey school model. Turkey school models is something, again, a mix of traditional Western models, but with maybe more reference to Islam, to the Muslim culture. So it was an alternative. It became an alternative. The issue was that since the beginning, all the educational sector was curbed and promoted by the Gulen movement. In some way, the Turkish state outsourced to the Gulen movement all the educational sector. But then became a problems with the rift between AKP and Gulen movement. You know that Turkish authority considered the Gulen movement behind the failed coup attempt in 2015, in Turkey. And that became a problem in many African states because the Gulenist school worked very well. They were able to establish a good network of relationship with the daughters and the son of leaders, of African leaders, African elite. All of them attended this school. So they've got a sort of influence on them. That became a problem. That's why Turkish state established Marif Foundation to counter the system, the Gulenist system of schools. And Marif progressively, it was not easy at the beginning, starting to take control of the former Gulenist school. Okay, so this school system is still working. Of course, after some years of problems for this change, nowadays it seems that is growing. So even Turkish school is a way to establish long-term relationship. And you would ask me why people would like to not only to attend Turkish school, but even to learn Turkish language for the soap opera, because Turkey is spreading not only in North Africa, but even Sub-Saharan Africa, many TV series. And all these TV series, in some cases, are translated in Arabic, but in some other are in Turkish. So people are watching and learning Turkish, or they are following some Turkish courses, language courses, in order to better understand TV series. But TV series are important not only for the language, but because they are spreading around African states the image of Turkey, of a modern country with still respect for Islamic and traditional value, but at the same time with modern lifestyle, Western lifestyle. So again, it's a mix. At the same time, this is an attractive mix for many. So I think that cultural diplomacy is, we can divide in two different levels: high culture. So, for example, the programs related to the schools, to education courses, Turkish language courses, so Yunus Emre centers, and so on. And pop culture, TV series, programs, even music, sports, everything. Try to sell the brand of Turkey. So I think this is a key aspect of public diplomacy or soft power of Turkey. And finally, I would say there's another important asset of this soft power, but even in concrete terms, that is Turkish Airlines. Turkish Airlines is really a key factor in the growing connection between African states and Turkey. Turkish Airlines open flight almost everywhere in Africa. That means that not only Turkish people or African people that want to fly to Turkey have to fly on Turkish Airlines, but that means that, for example, if I have to go to Addis, I've got two options: Ethiopian Airlines or Turkish Airlines, and I travel to Istanbul and then to Addis, for example. But the same things everywhere, Mogadishu as well. So people that have to fly in some places in Africa nowadays from Europe, from Asia, are flying with Turkish Airlines. But this, of course, not only create a connection, a strong connection with African state that is very useful for business, for example. Turkey and Turkish Airlines, so again, this connection between, of course, Turkish Airlines is a state-owned company, so it's not really a private company, but anyway, the connection between business and state, they decided to provide a business visa to African people in order to fly to Istanbul and doing business in Istanbul. So Istanbul is becoming a sort of hub of business where African business people can meet with people from around the world, not only Turkish people. This is really important. I think this is something useful to spread the image of Turkey as well. And some of these programs, I believe, will be able to survive even to financial problems. That Turkey has a lot of financial problems, but even can survive to a change in government, because sooner or later the Erdogan era will end. So the main question is, sometimes when I'm talking with people, is what happened next? What happened if there will be no more AKP? Some of these programs, some of these people-to-people relation will remain. You cannot change. You cannot delay it. Of course, nowadays the AKP is trying to create even relationship with some ruling party in some countries like Ethiopia, Somalia as well, Djibouti, but doesn't matter. There is a network, a web of relation on a different level, not a political level. And all of these relations will remain.
That's very interesting. Uh, since 2003, I think it was Tayyip Erdogan. He visited more than, I believe, 40 African countries. I think that's more than any uh, European leader per se. That is actually more than any African leader. To put that in perspective as well. So therefore, in comparison to other mid-sized powers like India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, uh, what do you think are the long-term commitment of Turkey? But also, what are the Turkey's biggest challenges in deepening its diplomatic ties with African nations?
Okay, well, the commitment, as I try to explain even in the former answer, I think there's a commitment to maintain good relationship with some African state, of course, more than other, and some African community more than other, but there is a commitment. I think that what is going on now and the fact that European countries are, or we can say even European Union, are disorganized. They do not have a common strategy. They do not behave in coordination manner in Africa. Uh, the United States, I show little interest, and most probably with this administration, they will reduce even more the interest to Africa, pave the way for even more deep commitment of Turkey. Of course, if you ask me, there are multiple limits, multiple challenge, and even multiple problems. The limits are related to resources. Turkey cannot invest too much resources in Africa, both in financial terms, but even in military terms. The core issue for Turkey remain uh, the neighboring area, so the countries, the borders. Uh, there's development in one of the neighbor state that is Georgia, that is carrying a lot Turkey. Because what is going on in Georgia is the increasing presence of Russia and influence of Russia. And if Russia would be able to establish a sort of puppet government in Georgia, that means that Turkey has Russia on his door. And that is a big, really a big problem. Then we've got Syria, and we have to see what is going on in Syria. So these are the core issue for Turkey. The East Med, for example, these are the area where the core of resources that Turkey has should be invested. So resources is the first problems. The second problems is a general lack of knowledge about African states, African diversity. Nowadays, things starting to change, and we've got African Center, university courses of African culture, African history, African international relation in university in Turkey. But since 10, 15 years ago, there was almost nothing. It was really general lack of knowledge. And this general lack of knowledge was both from the public and even at the political level. So sometimes Turkey invested a lot of efforts in a wrong manner. Then we've got another problem that is related more to the domestic development in Turkey. At the beginning, one of the core assets of the opening and the strengthening relation with African states was the role of civil society organization. Civil society organization like NGOs, foundation, business association, they were able to operate almost autonomously in Africa, in the African state. And these favor a lot of connection. But following the failed coup in Turkey and then the general democratic backsliding, all these civil society organizations lost some freedom of maneuver. That is a problem. That could be a problem in some African states. Finally, another point of concern is related to what I mentioned before. So what happened after the Erdogan era? Because Erdogan presents the African adventure as one of his main success, one of the things that he cares more than other, especially some we can say some relationship with Somalia, for example, is something that he present the golden story of AKP foreign policy. So following the next presidential election, if there will be another leader, another government, we are not sure that they want to invest so much in Africa. As I mentioned before, some connection will definitely remain and survive, but at we can say the state level, I'm not so sure that there will be the same engagement with African state and with some African regime.
Do you see a geopolitical friction between Ankara and Riyadh in relation to the Red Sea, but also uh,
No, I don't see geopolitical friction because Turkey is trying to balancing between UAE and Saudi Arabia. At the same time, with United Arab Emirates, Turkey has more convergence of interest, as we have seen, as you mentioned before, in the Ethiopia-Tigray war. At that time, they've got common interest in supporting Abiy. But for example, in Sudan, Turkey is trying to, we can say, be neutral, present itself as neutral, because they don't want to create any problems with both actors, Saudi and UAE, because they've got a lot of interest, not only political, but even financial interest with these states. They are supporting and investing a lot in Turkey, both, even in defense sector. They are buying a lot of defense hardware.
so in your analysis, do you think there was the economic component that incentivized Ankara to broker a peace or a mutual understanding not necessarily a peace between Mogadishu and Addis in relation to acquiring a port in Somaliland.
I think that behind the Ankara declaration, there are multiple reasons. Of course, Turkey aims to keep stability in these two states because both, for different reasons, are very important states for them and its regional policy. Ethiopia is the main trading partner in that area. Many Turkish companies establish some factories there, so it's really important. And of course, Ethiopia is a key player in the region, so it's important to keep good relationship with them. Somalia is the core of Turkish policy in the region because all the investment that Turkey has done in terms of financial, political, and security. But behind the agreement, the declaration, and we have seen if even the ongoing talks will address the core issue, so the access to the sea of Ethiopia. I don't think so, honestly. I don't think they will be able to find a solution. But what happened in December was, for different reasons, both Ethiopia and Somalia needed to de-escalate, because both, for different reasons, cannot afford tension and escalation.
No, no, it's still ongoing, Professor. I can hear you. Yeah. You don't see me? I can see you. Yeah, I can hear you. I can see you. Interesting. Uh, I guess this is a wild question. I guess it could be our final question. Uh, do you think Ankara can play moderator? Uh, because Ethiopia, in its current form, is on the brink of balkanization. Uh, where some analysts, and I would concur with their assessment that Abiy Ahmed has only control over the capital city, and you have the TDF, the Tigray region up north, with their own pseudo government, also a military structure, and you have on the Amhara ethnic group, which is the second most populous ethnic group in Ethiopia. They have the Fano rebel group, but also in the Oromo region, you have the OLA, the Oromo Liberation Army, and also on the Somali side of Ethiopia, you have the Ogaden. So therefore, Ethiopia, whether Ethiopians like it or not, Ethiopia it's a multi-ethnic state. So to save Ethiopia uh, from balkanization, do you think Turkey could have, in the future, there's a possibility actually Turkey might play a greater role than its neighboring countries or any European country for that matter? Interesting. Well, Professor, uh, I would like to thank you, and hopefully, you'll also you're more than welcome to come as a future guest, and we're lucky to have you in the future as well, Professor Donelli.